everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for novices and masters alike. I am Dan, my co-host is of course Josh.
Hello.
And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things Earthdawn, both magical, mechanical, and today I believe is going to be metallurgical, because we are talking about Weaponsmiths. But
yes,
if you have any questions after we're done, feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Where should we dive in? And we're going to try and avoid Forge Blade for as long as possible, because as you said, that could be a whole other podcast in and of itself.
Yeah,
the dissection of that.
I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit. We'll see what happens. Try and rein myself in. Maybe save that as like an addendum special episode. Josh rants about Forge Blade for 35 minutes.
Oh, you're gonna tone it down to 35? Fair enough. The first character I ever made was an Obsidian Weaponsmith, and I loved him to death. Played him, I think, 3 times before that group of players I had broke up. So it's near and dear to my heart. I love Weaponsmiths as an overall. My brother even played a Troll Weaponsmith. So it's one of my favorite disciplines to get to, because it's kind of half fighter and half studious entrepreneur, I guess.
Yeah, there's the Weaponsmith fills a fairly obvious legendary role. Like the niche of the Craftsman or Smith in legend and mythology is pretty obvious.
Oh,
but
it's from Greek mythology.
Well, yeah, just for one example. But the space within RPGs to have Craftsmen and Smiths be a playable character, to be a focal character like that, is pretty rare. It's not unheard of. Earthdawn is not the first or only game to do that. But a lot of times the crafting of items and whatnot tends to end up being a sort of secondary role, like something that is like set up for characters as in addition to or supplemental to their primary role. Mm-hmm. And so having an archetype, having a discipline in Earthdawn that is focused on that is pretty special in that space. And as someone who, in the course of development and working on a couple of different editions, has dealt with crafting systems and whatnot, I can understand why it is maybe not something that is explored a whole lot, just because it, as we will find here, can take a lot of non-active adventuring time.
Yes, but that's kind of part of the other facet of Earthdawn, is the non-adventuring time is just as important as the adventuring time. Yeah,
the downtime, the period. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going all the way back to the prior editions, where training times, both to advance in your discipline and to learn skills and to do other stuff, takes time, and you're not, barreling from one adventure to the next.
Yeah, I as a game master, I keep a running calendar so I can tell my players, okay, you spent 3 weeks off training, and now you're in this month and this and so day. And welcome to the passage of time. Your character is now aged a year and so forth. So I've done that little nitpicking, timekeeping, record keeping aspect that 4th edition is trying to get away from.
Well, it's still there, and it's not, it didn't go anywhere.
Yes.
And I mean, all of the long-term games that I've run have had a calendar that I have kept track of and kept track of downtime, and like, okay, we finished up this adventure, you're back in Bartertown. What do people want to do as far as their downtime? And basically keeping a spreadsheet with columns with the calendar dates going down the side, and then the characters across the top, each of them with their own column, and just marking in there what they were doing, on each of the days, and if they're training, well, then that takes 5 days and whatnot. Yeah. The other thing that sort of does is, if somebody happens to misplace their character or has questions about where things are, you can actually go back and rebuild their character, more or less, figuring out where things were spent and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's more detail than I got into, so kudos. All right, Weaponsmiths. So as we've discussed on other discipline builds, the Karma Ritual didn't really change a whole lot
No.
from previous editions. I find it cool that they have to make something imperfect to know what something perfect is in their actual role. So their Karma Ritual is to make something imperfect and then shatter it at the end to go, nope, this is not good enough. I just find that a neat thing for a Weaponsmith Karma Ritual.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, I don't really have a whole lot to add there. The Weaponsmith sort of role as a craftsman, obviously, the Karma Ritual would revolve around that in some faction, and
yes.
it would want to be something that you can do within that sort of block of time, and obviously, something like that is going to be symbolic and ritualistic as opposed to making a real quality item.
Yeah. So we can go ahead and skip down to the half magic ability, which is Weaponsmiths may use half magic when caring for weapons or armor, and to recognize different types of weapons and armor used or worn by different name-giver races or their creators. And I liken that to kind of like being a car mechanic who's been at it so long, he can tell a carburetor from one car company manufacturer from a different car company manufacturer just by sight alone across the garage. So I liken that to what Weaponsmiths can do in Earthdawn.
Sure, and that relates a little bit to what we were talking about similarly for archers a couple of episodes back.
Yes.
Again, we're looking at a true like craft level of creation with individualized creators rather than massive industrialized production.
Yeah.
And, so there will be distinctive marks and things like that. So that will be fairly clear to anybody who has some experience with the crafts.
Yeah. So I love that half magic ability. It's just kind of a neat little twist on them there. So then I think we hit down into just starting with the discipline talents. So
sure,
because we've done this before, and they get a free one. Craftsman, which is big D, big U, and big H. They should get something along those lines. This is something that was sort of the end result of development over the course of multiple editions, and that is in this case making something that for the Weaponsmith at least always seemed to be something that fell under their typical half magic ability, potentially. Like, it's something that they should be able to do, and just basically making it an explicit, like, this is something that they have, because half magic is something that's always been a little bit more freeform and nebulous, with different game masters and different tables allowing or disallowing certain things based on how they want to handle it. And much like Troubadour, which we haven't talked about yet, but kind of like Entertainer there, it makes sense that as someone whose primary focus is practicing a particular craft or whatever, that their ability as they advance in circle should increase to go along with that, but requiring them to maybe spend points in skill ranks to do that, where skills aren't really a focus of the system, runs into a little bit of a problem. And so basically it's like, well, in some of the, like we talked about with some of the other free things, let's make this an explicit ability that they have to make and build, in this case, not just weapons and armor, but in their role, it's not just that, though they are perhaps most famous for doing that, but also to have the ability to do other kind of craftsmen. And that is to say, I'm thinking more like large scale, like barrel making or any other kind of shoe horses or horseshoes
or horse.
Most Smiths started off as iron workings way back when to make farm implements. So
and stuff like that. There are other skills in the game that are considered craftsman skills. Somebody in a discussion pointed out map making, for example, is classified as a craftsman skill, but I don't see that something that would fall under the purview of a weaponsmith. It's not really. I mean, technically, it's a craftsman skill, but it's not. It's different. I mean, if you want to allow them, it just doesn't seem to. It doesn't seem to fall into what I would consider at least to be the wheelhouse of the weaponsmith.
I agree, because weaponsmith is usually over a forge with fire and raw materials.
Sure. I mean, the other direction that you could go with this, is that rather than calling out a separate ability, would be to perhaps allow them to use Forge Weapon or Forge Blade to make weapons, like to use that as a substitute for the skill, like craft weapon, and then going on to do that with like Forge Armor for armor. That's another possibility, that because in a lot of cases the abilities of what talents can do is kind of narrowly defined, I didn't want to go too far in terms of expanding, that kind of coverage. So this seemed like the best kind of middle ground between there, which is explicitly calling out they have the ability to do this. You don't need to spend extra points above and beyond in order to realistically portray what they should be able to do as they get into Journeyman or higher circles.
And you also don't want to give the player an out to say you shouldn't not spend points in this, because you should be getting better as you go. This is a very crucial part of Earthdawn, so don't slack off on this and bump all your combat skills up and leave your Craftsman behind as a weaponsmith.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily just that it's a necessary part of Earthdawn, although it is. It's a necessary part of this particular archetype, right? That you need to have the abilities to do the stuff that they should be able to do, without needing to like saddle them with a whole bunch of extra resource spending for and even greater amounts of downtime for the sake of realistic simulation of how this might actually work. Basically trying to look at that from a gameable standpoint. It's like, how can we do this without, basically requiring them to spend a whole lot more stuff than other disciplines. Like, we don't require swordmasters or weaponsmiths or stuff like, or weaponsmiths, swordmasters or warriors or things like that to have a whole bunch of supplemental skills that they need to supposedly do their job.
Yeah. So I agree. They should get this free skill, free talent. Sorry. It's awesome in rightfully.
The other thing that this does is by explicitly kind of calling it out as an ability, as opposed to leaving it into the vague thing of half magic. I've heard a number of stories and have witnessed a couple running demos and whatnot with 4th edition Weaponsmiths that allows some people to be kind of clever in using that ability to bypass obstacles and whatnot. That like basically sort of like a Iron Man engineer kind of like solve the problem by not smashing it, but like hitting it with a hammer kind of thing. Not in the violent whatever, but okay, we don't have a thief in our party to pick the lock. Well, are the hinges on this side? Can I take my little hammer and whatnot and take,
I'm going
like
to
do stuff like
reverse engineer this, or
like kind of deconstruct some things, whatnot, and where that doesn't double up with existing abilities. Like, I probably wouldn't allow a weaponsmith to use Craftsman to, say, disarm a trap, because there is a specific talent that does that.
Yes.
Trying to protect a certain amount of niche protection. But, if it's a purely mechanical trap, depending on how things are set up, I could certainly see an argument for allowing it.
Yeah, get a high enough roll. You may require some extra successes on that, because this is not up your alley entirely. So I'd change your difficulty number.
Maybe.
Yeah. So, okay, first circle, free talent done. Durability of 5, because again, they're not a frontline fighter, but they're not a magician either. So it's in that middle ground there.
Right, that specialist zone.
Totally. And they have a karma. They can burn karma on any test to craft or repair an item. Again, right up their alley as it should be. Right
up their alley. And this does allow them, if they are using Craftsman, which is effectively a talent and allows them to spend karma, they could spend a second point of karma on it. Basically meaning that for the most part, especially if you're dealing with mundane items and stuff that's got low target numbers in terms of the difficulty or whatnot, to really be able to do what they're supposed to do.
And do it well.
Mm-hmm.
This is why
Absolutely.
They get paid the big bucks. So, all right, discipline talents. Forge weapon.
Yes.
Kind of a big duh.
That's been around since the first edition, and we said we weren't going to go down that rabbit hole just yet.
Exactly.
So
congratulations, it's there, and we're going to leave it there.
It increases damage of weapons. It was originally called Forge Blade, but it works on any kind of weapon. Yeah. So it's basically a scaling damage adder that is limited in a few ways and has seen a few different changes over the years as attempts to balance it in relation to other things have been tried.
Yeah. So item history. And I love the fact that weaponsmiths get the item history. Like I said, like the mechanic across the garage, you can say, oh yeah, that's the carburetor from a 50-something Packard or whatever not. So
sure.
I think they should get something along those lines.
Yeah, well, they did all the way back in first edition. They got weapon history, which is similar. It was a little bit narrower in that it could only be used on weapons. I don't remember offhand whether it could be used on armor as well. But like, if you had a magical brooch, the weaponsmith wouldn't be able to do anything with it. There was again, in the course of various editions, as attempts to somewhat streamline the talent choices a little bit, that was one of the early changes to basically roll weapon history into item history and give it to weaponsmiths the same way that it was given to troubadours and is an option for a couple of other disciplines.
Yeah, I'm just looking up because I had coincidentally happened to have my first edition book next to me for weapon history. So
weapon history was first circle for, if I'm recalling correctly, weapon history was first circle for weaponsmith, was not a discipline talent for them, so they couldn't spend karma on it. Whereas item history, or maybe it was the other way around.
Yeah, weapon history required karma.
Right. But was it discipline?
This was not for weaponsmith only. Yes,
it is discipline. Okay, so item history was the one that was not. So flashback to old stuff.
Yes,
it required karma, but because it was a discipline talent for weaponsmiths who were the only discipline that got it, it actually meant that they had the choice whether to spend karma or not.
Yeah.
Which meant that item history was the one that was not discipline for troubadours and did require karma. So
that's the
it
one
was
that you had to use to find anything out about armor, because weapon history only says things about weapons, but nothing about armor. So
okay, yeah, there might have been a knack that was developed later to allow that.
I think so,
but yeah, like that was sort of one of the things I think that came about in the various development of that was, well, if weaponsmiths can do stuff with armor, why can't their history talent find out things about armor as well?
It was one of those. It needed to be. And I hate to use the term piecemeal together, pun not intended, for piecemeal armor. I like the clarification and the melding of things that have happened in 4th edition for the weaponsmiths, especially along the lines of item history.
The item history change was not original to 4th edition. I think that was done in 3rd. It might have even been done in 2nd, if I'm recalling correctly, but I don't have that book handy to double check.
We're not going to get too deep into the weeds on that one because we're here for 4th.
That's right.
And then, of course, forged weapon item history, melee weapons, or melee weapons, if you want to do the proper French pronunciation, which I never do.
Obviously, with their focus on
weapon
crafting and weapons and weaponsmith, they get that's their close combat ability, is their ability to use melee weapons.
Yes.
Pretty straightforward.
Big D, big U, big H. And then I've always loved the fact that weaponsmiths get steel thought.
Yeah, we talked about steel thought previously in terms of the changes that it went through in other editions, where it was originally a mystic armor enhancer as opposed to a mystic or an originally spell defense enhancer. But keeping it them as an early talent is fairly distinctive and has always been something that was part of the weaponsmith flavor, even though the exact mechanic of how it has changed.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's what they've got.
Yeah, I love the fact that they get to keep it there. And then, of course, the thread weaving, thread smithing. So we're good there. So I have no issues with first circle talents. Second circle, they get a mystic defense bonus, but then they have the discipline talent of conversation. Because, again, you go higher weaponsmiths a lot. In fact, you can insert the line here from the George Clooney movie, "Oh, brother, where art thou?" as he hops on the train. Any of you boys smithies? Because you want to get the leg chains off.
Right.
So, gotta have some conversations.
Yeah, and weaponsmiths are a social discipline, not to the extent perhaps or in the same way that troubadours or swordmasters might be, but they are in a lot of places, and the sort of flavor text for them has kind of supported this over the years, that they are oftentimes well regarded, and if not, not necessarily like the leaders of a community, but an important person, that is, in charge or looked to for guidance or advice or things like that. And so there is definitely a social aspect of that.
Yes.
So the conversation being the sort of broadly useful social talent absolutely is right up their alley in that regard.
And they're one of the very few that actually engage in outright commerce as part of the
Yeah.
discipline, along with the troubadour, because they can perform and get money. So yeah, the weaponsmith needs to be hired. And again, as one of the pillars of the community, they had farm implements that they needed to take care of and fashion. So yeah, they obviously are an integral part of society. Third circle, they get karma point on recovery tests. No issue. And then they get suppress curse, which I think is renamed from abate curse.
Yeah, I think again this is something that popped up when we talked about wizard. Abate curse originally only dealt with curses like on items, and it was one of those that if you don't have cursed items show up much, if at all, in your game, then it's a talent that's not doing anything.
Yes.
And so it was expanded a little bit to take over a little bit of the territory that was covered by Dispel Magic in earlier editions, to allow it to temporarily suppress other magical effects, not only curses, but also, like debuff spells and things like that might be affecting people, or powers from creatures and whatnot. And kind of plays into one of the things that's not really explicit so much in the like flavor text for them so much, but is fairly clear when you look at the like talent selections that they have over the years.
Yeah.
Is that the Weaponsmith was always very defensively oriented. Like a lot of their talents and so forth were really geared towards support and defense, and suppress curse obviously fits right into that idea.
Yeah, hence your previous statement in another podcast that weaponsmiths were tanks.
Yeah. Yeah,
previous
that they certainly had that potential in terms of the talents that they had and were able to bring to bear.
Definitely. Again, my first character, I liked him a lot. Fourth circle, wound balance. Not a big change from their progression of talents from earlier editions, and also incredibly helpful.
It's a decent sort of defensively aligned talent that allows the weaponsmith to sort of be sturdy and not be knocked down in the face of physical assault.
Yeah, and plus he gets a +1 physical defense, so they go hand in hand, literally, at fourth circle. So let's go to the options, because that's everyone's fun part. Avoid blow, and that's just, everyone needs to...
Yeah, no real... I mean, it's something that they should get fairly early, and no real space to put it in as a discipline talent.
Yeah.
But I imagine if you are taking an approach with a weaponsmith that is more combat-oriented, it's a natural pick for an early option.
Absolutely.
And combines really well in that regard with Steel Thought. So you've got both your physical and your mystic reaction defenses.
Especially if you take it first circle, you're in good shape. And of course, awareness. So avoid blow and awareness are almost like the big D, big U, and big H of everybody.
Yeah. We've talked about awareness, with the weaponsmith as a sort of community-minded individual and somebody that may be looking for, on the lookout for protection of the place that they call home.
Yeah.
Being able to spot trouble is worthwhile, which ties, of course, right into their next option, which is Danger Sense.
Yes. Love both of those. Because the weaponsmith is supposed to notice nicks, cuts, abrasions, polish them out, or smooth them out with a whetstone, and make things as perfect as possible for a weaponsmith, because it is the art of things, as well as the functionality of things. He's not trying to put lace on a bowling ball. It's functional first and form later. But awareness, I think, would do a good service to all of that. Just visual perception as far as, or even auditory, because if the metal doesn't sing properly, quote unquote, doesn't sing properly when it's finally forged and ready, the harmonics are not going to work for the weapon. It's going to have a flaw in it. And then yes, Danger Sense is just a wonderful thing to have. For
it's a decent defensive sort of reaction type ability. Again, kind of playing into that theme of things.
Yeah, they should know that if the shield they're making is defensively capable, they should have a good sense of danger as well. So just know when, okay, I know now I need to draw my sword. So, so just instead of continuing to forge it, draw it now. And they do get disarm traps. So
they do get it as an option because it makes sense as craftsmen, as tinkerers and whatnot, that should be something that would be available for them if they want to go that route.
So harking back to 15 minutes ago when Josh explained that.
definitely is not something that needs to be in their discipline talent selection that all of them have. But for a certain approach, if you're going with more of a sort of tinkerer type, it's absolutely, especially again, if your group doesn't have a thief, it might be worthwhile to, if you're going to be running a game that's going to be running into that, might be worthwhile to have.
I love the next one, and I would have to research my other earlier editions to see if this was ever in their talent list, but Fireblood I think makes perfect sense because they do work around a fire all day long.
Right. You've got the forge, you've got the hearth and the heat and so forth that goes with that, and the ability to draw strength from that, or again, Fireblood looking at it as sort of a defensively aligned type thing where you're healing and recovering yourself, seems to be good. Again, as an option. If you're going with a more combat oriented build for a weaponsmith is one that's worth looking at.
Yeah, I would even as a game master, as a player for a weaponsmith, I would beg my game master to make Fireblood the discipline talent at second circle and take out conversation. That's just me, but that's the character I want to make. So, and then of course you have first impression and haggle. Yep. I think go hand in hand, really.
Yeah, both social talents that work really well. First impression not quite as important as conversation. I don't think in terms of its in terms of its role in the weaponsmith being a little bit more solid and dependable and long term, as opposed to looking to make that really big splash right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, it is something, particularly perhaps if you're looking at a sort of, again, itinerant tinker type weaponsmith who might be, rather than having a town that he is based out of, being more of a nomadic type that maybe is doing the rounds of an area. Mm-hmm. Having that first impression to be able to make it a little bit easier to fit into whatever community he might be coming across. And then haggle, obviously the weaponsmith is a businessman, and there is a certain amount of, fiduciary role that goes along with that. So haggle is a natural fit. Again, one of those things that in a first edition style where you've got all of the talents laid out specifically at each circle is gonna show up somewhere in that early progression. Yes. But where you're looking at the options from the later edition design paradigm doesn't really have a space, but absolutely should be there for those who want to take it.
Agreed.
And whether you pick it up or not for your weaponsmith will depend in part on what the rest of the group is doing, and whether it's worth picking up or how much overlap you're going to have for your group's abilities.
Yeah, so I like it as an option because if you're not doing a lot of that commerce back and forth as a weaponsmith, then yeah, it's in earlier editions I felt like I didn't get a chance to do that much as far as the role playing was concerned. So I'm spending points on haggle for almost no reason. Comes into play seldomly. So I agree with it being an option. If that's the way your game is leaning, great. If not, then optionize that the whole 9 yards. I'm going to put two of them together and skip one for a second. So we have read and write language and speak language. So
again, for a social sort of community-based discipline, those are two talents that just make a lot of sense. Speak language, obviously, the ability to be able to magically communicate with people in different communities that might not, for whatever reason, speak the common tongue, or their dialect might have drifted, or something along those lines. Yes. Read and write language, there is a certain scholarly bent to the weaponsmith. Being able to like look at old records and whatnot, perhaps not to the same degree that, say, a troubadour or a wizard might be, but definitely both are, the language talents. Again, a lot of this stuff that we're going through here for this is, the weaponsmith it's fulfilling that role.
And sometimes, as part of the craftsman, they're actually asked to inscribe runes on weapons, armor, and whatnot. So they have to know the languages and proper spellings of those things as well, because it's like the Snickers commercial where you misspelling.
Getting tattoos with the things misspelled.
Yes. And then, of course, the last one is Shield Bash, which I just love as an offensive capability. Because with melee weapons, they should know they're going to make shields as well. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there's that. There's the understanding of using the shield. It is a little bit of a talent sort of designed for the more combat-oriented direction of a weaponsmith, if that's the way you're going to go. But where, as we've kind of seen, the weaponsmith doesn't get a lot of real, like, offensive combat enhancing stuff. And so, you know, they get melee weapons, they get Fireblood, sort of, which, again, but that's not offensive. Shield Bash is sort of the closest, like, booster in there, you know, basically using that to knock down and kind of control the battlefield. In a sense.
The first 4 circles, that's the only 2 offensive things you get.
Right.
So you make the most of them as you can. So yes, by all means, have a melee weapon and a shield bash talent, and you can have maybe 2 attacks. So go from there. Okay, so into...
Well, shield bash is not an additional attack.
Sorry.
A lot of people think about that as like it's an additional attack. Shield bash is a damage test replacement. So you would still use melee weapons to attack with your shield. So you'd roll your normal melee weapons, and then Shield Bash is basically the effect test from that, and that sets the difficulty to knock the opponent down. It does not grant you an extra attack. It allows you to use your shield and enhances basically an attack to knock down using your shield to do it.
And that is your survival guide podcast tip of the week.
There you go. Because anybody who has played some anybody who has played any amount of Earthdawn combat will know being knocked down is bad, and knocking down your enemies is good.
Good. Yes. That is, I love those mechanics alone.
Especially if the person you are knocking down is an enraged cadaver man.
Yes. The Berserker, I hate those.
You knock them down, then they are penalized trying to attack you from the ground, or they spend their action getting up.
Yes. But I do love the Berserkers on the Game Master side of the screen, because that's the fun part.
Obviously.
Go from 1 attack per turn to 4. It's awesome. Yeah, just Berserker Rage. Great. Okay, 5th circle. They get the Traveling Smithy, which is always fun. 2 strain, the Adept uses magic to create an improvised forge, provided he has the minimum requirements necessary. Fire, working metal, so forth and so on. I just think that's an awesome idea that they don't have to carry an anvil with them everywhere they go.
There are some abilities that they have that require them to work at a forge. And for the typical adventuring weaponsmith, that is not always possible.
Yeah.
And so once they hit Journeyman, they have enough of the weaponsmith magic about them that they can convert, you know, they can kind of put together a makeshift forge wherever they happen to be. Yeah. Obviously, it doesn't work as well as the real thing. There's a penalty that applies to any of the tests that are made using that. But it would allow, in a situation where, you know, we need to, like, we've got a little bit of time beforehand, I want to, like, while other people are preparing, I'm going to, like, enhance some weapons or whatever, or repair some gear or whatever. Yeah. That needs to be done, but we're out in the wilderness and don't otherwise have the wherewithal to do it.
So no, I like it. It makes sense for the nomadic, as you said, adventuring party. So that just works in nicely to the storylines. They also get they can spend now a point of karma on damage tests he makes with a weapon they crafted.
Yes, and a lot of people, I think, extend that to mean weapons, not necessarily that they created from scratch, but have done some work on, say with the forge blade or the forge weapon talent or something like that, which is fine. I don't know that I have
a strong opinion.
I don't have a problem with that. You know, again, getting into my feelings on crafting systems and whatnot, that it takes up a lot of time, and if it's only you know, because then you run into problems with, well, okay, the weaponsmith has picked up happens to have a thread sword, a magic sword that they've picked up. Well, he didn't make that sword. Somebody else made that however long ago.
Oh, clearly.
Is he going to basically do away with his ability to spend karma on damage because of that. I don't necessarily think that that's particularly, he would need to have done some work on it. But yeah, otherwise, oh no, sorry, this ability that you get is no longer allowed because you got a new toy. Seems to be a little bit, or an old toy, as the case may be. It just seems a little bit unfair, a little bit troublesome to basically, oh no, sorry, you can't use this ability anymore because you found something cool that you want to use.
You can't use that ability on the sword you're going to use to try and split that hair on the rule. So, and then fifth circle, they finally get the Forge Armor talent, and I think it's a proper place for it.
Yeah, so Forge Armor was a talent that was available much later in first edition. I don't even know that it was available that early. It might not have been available until... Hold on, I've flipped my first edition book here right now. No, it wasn't even available in the first 8 circles of first edition. So it wasn't available until the companion. Yeah. So it was moved earlier. It was moved earlier sooner than 4th edition, in part just to give people an opportunity to play it for a couple of reasons. One, it's actually not really that common, I don't think, for games to actually get into those Warden and Master tiers, right? The amount of time that it takes and the amount of legend points required to advance to that point.
Ditto.
I have run multiple long-term games of Earthdawn, lasting years. And like in all of the cases that I have had, the games tended to peter out around 8th or 9th circle.
I have been running the same group of characters now for 10 or almost 15 years because it started when my daughter was born. She's 15 now. And they haven't made it past 8th. So I'm with you. And my players are listeners that are like, hallelujah. Yeah, it takes a long time to get there.
I am aware of one game that started basically when the original promo flyers were released back in 93. And while not regularly meeting every week or whatever, is actually still an ongoing single campaign to this day.
Congratulations.
And so has had multiple characters that actually have achieved really, really high circles. But again, you're talking about something that's 30 years, 35,
Yeah, that's going.
That's a
long time.
That is a long time, and that is Andrew Raglan's campaign.
Oh yeah, one of the developers on 1879.
The lead developer for 1879. But yeah, his Earthdawn game has more or less been ongoing since the game was originally released, and has had generations up, subsequent and new characters coming in, and it's a sprawling epic. It's amazing to hear of.
I
but
remember his stuff in the Earthdawn Journal and his rules on playing an orc. That's where I know Andrew from way back when. Been a big fan forever.
But I honestly think that sort of thing tends to be I have heard stories of other characters kind of being that high, but it's not very common. And also on top of that, if you think about the demographics of how many adepts there are, and I would think if you're going to be doing that realistically, there are probably more weaponsmiths than some other disciplines in existence. And so you would potentially have more. But even then, given the percentage of how many potential adepts there are, according to information from old materials and stuff like that, you're still not looking at a lot of them. And so the forged armor talent just basically would not be something that would come into play, which may be which from a certain standpoint can be intentional. That's fine. But at that point, and again, trying not to go down the rabbit hole of Forge Blade, you basically you've got the Forge Blade as a damage enhancer and Forge Armor as a counter to that. When you've got a big sort of gap in between the availability of those, damage starts to outstrip armor potential, and you look at the same kind of thing that you had as a potential problem with previous editions and the way that armor defeating hits worked, which was that beyond a certain point, armor just wasn't worth it, is that the amount of protection that armor could provide in relation to the amount of damage that could come out and your physical defense and the chance that a high attack is going to completely bypass your armor anyway, it all just kind of snowballs together into well, here's a talent that would potentially be really, really useful to help with that sort of game balance situation, but it's generally speaking not available. And so, moving it earlier, it shifts the balance somewhat. Armor is a little bit more important in 4th edition as far as the numbers go than it was in previous editions. And so allowing that as a counterbalance to the damage boosting potential of Forge Blade, especially with some of the changes that were implemented to kind of roll it back to more of a 1st edition style. Again, not to go down that rabbit hole. I've been edging there. I also
figure it's just Forge armor needed to be moved up, because if you have a party of, say, 5 or 6 characters walking into town and they come across a forge, and the game master has to play the NPC of the weaponsmith, you're going to get 3 or 4 people dropping by a sword or a dagger or whatnot to be worked on, and maybe one of them has some armor to fix a nick or a scratch or a cut or something like that. So eventually, they're going to need to get to that a little bit sooner than my 8th circle weaponsmith master can finally get to that, or 9th circle maybe get to that early, whatever it came up with. Yeah, how soon can you get there? Yeah, my understudy, the kid at the forge who's learning this, literally the journeyman or the apprentice.
Forge 12th? Armor. I just grabbed the companion off the 11th. Right, yeah. You were close. 11th circle. That is
a hike.
That is up there.
Hike to get to, and as far as points are concerned and time. So no, I agree. Forge armor needed to be a whole lot sooner. I like it here at 5th. I'm fine with that. That makes sense.
5th circle,
because your first 2 or 3 circles are pretty darn quick. 4th, you hang around in for a while. We finally get 5th. You go, now I know what this character's all about. You get the groove in. You know everything and all the dance moves. You're fine. So 5th circle. Forge armor makes absolute sense to me. So we can avoid the rabbit hole. There we are. So 6th circle, they get now a +2 to mystic defense. And this is where the math gets weird for people. It's not an additional 2 on top of mystic defense, right? It's just their total bonus is now a 2.
Their total bonus is now a +2. And at the beginning of the chapter, it is made explicit that the highest bonus is what applies. So effectively, you get an additional +1, bringing your total bonus to +2.
Yeah, just
for the
sure
mystic
for
defense.
People who can't reference their books while they're driving and listening on the bus. But 6th circle talent, they get temper flesh, and if they're tempering metal along the way for armor, weapons, and shields, why shouldn't they be able to temper their flesh? It's a magical ability that makes perfect sense to me.
Yep, it's another defensive ability, and basically the weaponsmith makes a test and then adds his rank in temper flesh to both his death and unconsciousness ratings as well as his wound threshold for a day.
Very few talents that ever affects a wound threshold.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of them.
2. I think the second one, so it's a very short list. But I like temper flesh as far as that's concerned.
Again, sort of expanding the thought of the weaponsmith as a sort of defensive, as someone who is enhancing and supporting and protecting. Again, hey, let's add even more to their sort of tankiness, their ability to stand there and take abuse as they get into their journeyman levels.
And that is your Earthdawn Survival Guide new word of the week: tankiness. So on to 7th circle. +1 to mystic armor for the first time, so we'll take that as well. And I like the fact that their mystic armor is naturally enhanced because, again, it's magical, and they should enhance their armor because they're a weaponsmith. So just layers upon layers of de facto. It should happen.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll see, we hadn't really been talking about those bonuses for the other disciplines, but you'll find that most of the disciplines that have a kind of mystical bent to them will be getting a bonus to mystic armor somewhere in there. But I think most magicians get a bonus to mystic armor somewhere in this range as well, if not sooner, depending on the discipline.
We covered a lot of the talents before in other recordings. I figured we know what avoid blow does and awareness does. We've covered those already. So listen to them in order, not alphabetical order. And so we can kind of talk about the bonuses a little bit because, again, Weaponsmith I just think is very, very cool. Like I said, my first character ever.
Yeah.
But 7th circle to get Spot Armor Flaw. And I think that also is a more rapid progression for them to get that because I think that took a while to get to last time.
Spot Armor Flaw was, not going to look it up, but it was available, fairly early. It's, again, one that sort of makes sense for the Weaponsmith. They work with this stuff. They would be able to, take advantage of that knowledge. This is another combat offensive type talent, but not one that is so as blatant as, say, Crushing Blow or something like that. It is one where they use their knowledge of the craft and stuff like that to, overcome their enemies, their targets' weaknesses.
So let's go over the difference because I think in the other editions, before 4th edition, because Spot Armor Flaw affected their ability to do an armor defeating hit. They got one level lower, unless I'm reading that.
That's a possibility. You're making me look it up now, man. Spot Armor Flaw. No, actually, it was a damage adder.
Really?
Add a damage step bonus equal to the character's rank in Spot Armor Flaw to all attack tests made against the opponent.
Really?
Yep. So it's just a straight up. It's just a straight up damage adder in original. In 4th edition, I don't know. There was. It might have been one of the higher circle talents that did that, like critical hit or something along those lines that would reduce the level required for an armor defeating hit. But Spot Armor Flaw in 4th edition specifically targets and reduces the target's armor because you no longer have armor defeating hits in the same sense, reducing their actual armor rating and therefore doing more damage as a result of that. It does suffer from the problem of if the target does not have any armor, it doesn't do anything for you. Like, it doesn't actually add to your damage directly. It adds to your damage by reducing how much your damage is reduced.
So no,
if you followed the
train,
the like breakdown of that, let us diagram that sentence for you by lowering the amount of damage that is taken anyway. Yes. So
the circular,
but from a like flavor standpoint and kind of maybe alluding to the question that we had last time about, well, what's the difference between downstrike and crushing blow, where one seems to be more powerful. Like, there are damage enhancing talents that are more effective in certain circumstances than Spot Armor Flaw. But Spot Armor Flaw seems like super in flavor for the Weaponsmith, and so its shortcomings don't strike me as anything that's bad. In the same way that Spot Armor Flaw for archers, where that's based on their perception, their ability to see those weak points, as opposed to just being, more powerful to punch through it. So like absolutely in flavor, and the fact that it might not do as much. Again, Weaponsmiths aren't necessarily like frontline power combatants.
So no slaying unarmed peasant or unarmored peasants. None of that. None of that now.
Well, they'll still do it. They just won't use this talent to enhance their damage at all.
Have at it. Otherwise, we're looking at you weird if you do. 8th circle. So the first half, otherwise, the Mystic Defense bonus, and then Lionheart.
Yes. Actually, before we do that, I was just flipping. Spot Armor Flaw in 4th edition is actually a direct damage adder.
Oh, cool.
So forget what all of that I was saying about, like, oh, it's limited. No, it is basically just a it's not a damage adder the way that Crushing Blow is. They basically make a test and it provides you bonus damage based on the number of successes. So it is not actually restricted in any way by the opponent's armor.
So whatever Josh said
all of that stuff that I was just saying about Spot Armor Flaw, I might have been talking about like the 3rd edition version of that, which might have had some kind of restriction based on their armor that we got rid of. This is the problem when you have been playing the game. This is the problem that you run into when you have been playing the game through multiple editions.
Memory gets a little fuzzy.
And at the same time, as working as a developer, and some talents seeing iterations, like 3 or 4 different versions as we try and hammer it into a shape that works. even now, after it having like the final version having been out for a few years, I lose track of what we're actually
That's
doing.
okay. So 1,000 legend points to whoever can actually find out what Josh just said and send it to us and where it came from. I'm kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. That doesn't matter. But yeah.
So yeah, no, it's more or less a damage adder, just not as direct as like Crushing Blow. So
and then finally, 8th circle, as we said, Lionheart. And
Lionheart.
I always have to look that one up because I can't remember ever what it does because it takes so long for it.
Yeah, basically, what it is it's an enhancement to willpower when you are making when a spell or effect allows you to make a willpower test to shake it off. Commonly, these are like fear effects and things like that. Lionheart basically enhances your willpower for the purposes of doing that. It's a defensive talent going into the theme of like the solid, unshakable, reliable,
Tankiness.
like, village smith, having that ability to resist fear and similar kind of magical
and be the stalwart
effects.
Stalwart,
stalwart. That's a great word. We hadn't had that word yet, but yes, that is a very appropriate word for that. So, again, all of these things that we've been are really in flavor for the style of the Weaponsmith as a sort of defensive type character with some social
underpinnings
and a little bit of with some social overtones and a little bit of scholarly stuff thrown in there as well.
I cannot spot any flaws in the discipline talent layout for Weaponsmiths, but let's get to the Journeyman options because we don't want to forget those at all.
Nope.
First one's Battle Shout, which I think is also a good supplementary talent to have for not a frontline fighter, because this is supposed to boost everybody.
Battle Shout is actually the one that Battle Shout is the. So you've got Battle Shout and Battle Bellow. Battle Shout is Novice for Sky Raiders. It's the one that it's sort of like Taunt in that it provides penalties to your target, the person that you're yelling at. And so again, to sort of like it's if you're going with a sort of combat oriented direction for your Weaponsmith, it's one that's potentially worth looking at.
And I always confuse confuse those two.
Yeah, Battle Bellow is the one that helps. Yeah, Battle Bellow does kind of the same thing, but also helps enhance your allies as well.
That's why they wrote them down, so I could look them up and get them right every single time, because I have to look them up every single time. And then Diplomacy, I think, goes along with the first impression and the haggle and the conversation. It's just one of those. Yeah.
Diplomacy is the. Like, it's not available at Novice tier, it's available at Journeyman tier, and is a good... Again, if you're looking at the Weaponsmith as a community leader or important person in a community, having the ability to negotiate between feuding parties or whatever is certainly something that would be within their purview.
Yes, stopping a land dispute between this farmer and that farmer, or whose cattle is whose, all that. Yeah, absolutely. Earthskin, one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah, Weaponsmiths don't get Woodskin, which is a related talent, but because they get Temper Flesh, which does a similar kind of thing in terms of boosting damage ratings or the character's health ratings, Earthskin is sort of a supplement to that, and that it also provides a bonus to Mystic Defense on top of the other stuff that it does. And so, again, with their ties to metal and forging and enhancement, it's a decent defensive ability, and seems to be kind of in flavor with them, where Woodskin maybe not quite so much, because that seems a bit more wildernessy.
I do. I absolutely agree entirely with that one. And then, of course, Etiquette, because that goes along with the diplomacy and the haggle and the conversation. So
there's more social stuff.
So they're literally about a third of a social discipline than.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of social stuff in the Weaponsmith. And we'll get to that, I think, in sort of our capstone of like what you're looking at and whatnot. But yeah, there's absolutely a strong social aspect. Again, they are a community figure, and so there's a lot of that is involved. And while the talents have a lot of overlap, say with the Troubadour, who has a lot of these same social abilities, the direction and the flavor of them as you sort of role play them and how they would express these abilities can be very different.
Yes. And I think, leading to the next one, Fire Heal, which is different from...
Yeah, if you're going to... Yeah, Fire Heal is a talent that allows you to gain additional recovery tests. Like, you build a fire and you jump into the fire and you try and basically draw on the power of the fire to give you additional recovery tests. Elementalists get this. It is available as an option to a couple of other disciplines as well. But if you've got Fireblood, having Fire Heal and being able to give yourself more recovery tests that you can use to power Fireblood later on during the day is very useful. Fire Heal is also particularly useful for to like kind of go slightly afield here. A Questor of Garland.
There you go.
Absolutely, like having Fire Heal for a Questor of Garland is nice because several of their abilities allow them to spend their own recovery tests to give somebody else a recovery test.
I should have put that in the essay.
But, you know, the Elementalists... You wrote that. That's right. You wrote the Garland essay.
Yes.
And I mean, Elementalists are good with that as well because they've got a spell called Grove Renewal that allows them that a recovery test needs to be spent for each target of the spell to benefit from it. And having Fire Heal where the Elementalist can spend those recovery tests on behalf of the people that they're targeting is also worthwhile. So, you know, it's definitely something to look at as a potential if you are going to be in a situation where your Weaponsmith may be getting into more combat and you're going with a more combat-oriented build. Maybe looking at that as an option for, you know, a way to have more recovery ability.
Yeah, I played a character with Fire Heal, and I knew we were going to a major combat the next day, and so I bumped up as much as I possibly could, and I got like 3 extra recovery tests, and I had planned out, okay, if I can take a minute out of combat, rest up a little bit, I can go do another recovery test, and I can get back in. And so we did plan that combat rather well. I took full advantage of that, no doubt, because those last for 24 hours. Yeah. So you've got, as long as you can pull them off, you can go. Right. So digging that. And then Heartening Laugh.
Works, I mean, sort of along similar lines to Battle Shout. This is more of a support your friends. Again, looking at the Weaponsmith as a stolid, stalwart, like support character, having Heartening Laugh to basically help your friends shake off or resist the fear effects of horrors or other nasties that might be trying to do stuff to you. Makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And Iron Constitution, is that renamed or is that brand new?
Iron Constitution, I think, is a renamed thing. I don't remember off the top of my head what that does.
That's the reason I had to ask.
Oh, it's a bonus to basically it's an enhancement to toughness to resist poison and disease.
Oh, so it's probably like resist poison, resist disease rolled into Iron Constitution then.
Yeah.
So this is the only instance you will find in Earthdawn where you hear the word Constitution, a D&D mainstay.
Yeah. Well, it was originally, I think it was originally might have been called resist poison, and it only did poison, and we expanded it to cover disease as well, and then consequently we had to rename it, and Iron Constitution was a name that was available, so we used it. It also can be used when you are making a recovery test to heal damage inflicted by poison or disease. So it is
very versatile.
A way that, like, if you get hit by a damaging poison, like, say, from a ghoul or something along those lines, you can use the Iron Constitution to substitute for your normal toughness to heal that damage. Now, admittedly, that does require you perhaps to keep track a little bit of what damage is poison and what not, if you really want to be a stickler about it. But it's a little bit of a, you know, another like recovery boosting along the lines of Fireblood and things like that.
And so the next talent I'm going to get to in a second or so, since we've talked about haggle and first impression and conversation and diplomacy, leadership, as you've mentioned, a community figure is a natural fit in there for, especially if you want to be the level-headed thinker among your brash new party. You're the weaponsmith.
Yep.
You're used to standing on your feet all day long. You know how to take your time at something and make a plan on how to not only create something from scratch or raw materials, how to fix something and the proper way to attack that. This just goes along with the leadership ability.
And that could play into, like, if you're going for a sort of archetype of maybe an older weaponsmith who might not have necessarily been like an adept warrior, but might have been a soldier or something like that, and has retired to be a smith, but has that ability to step forward and lead a company in the defense of the village and things. I again, like, archetypes galore kind of going on with that.
Again, love weaponsmiths. Cannot gush about them enough. And then, of course, missile weapons.
Missile weapons is an option.
And my question is, why not throwing weapons?
Because I'm not sure of the reason on that.
I just had to ask the question for anybody else who's listening. So,
it's more or less making an option available for them for range, and missile weapons was the choice.
No, I think just because you think you know me as a weaponsmith, I only do these two things: weapons and armor and shields. That's it. No, I'm gonna just blow your mind a little bit and hit you to distance.
Sure, yeah. I mean, throwing weapons could potentially be in there, and I would not have a problem if somebody really conceptually wanted to just do throwing weapons instead of missile weapons as an optional talent and take it. By all means, I don't think that's a problem in any real way.
And last and certainly not least is resist taunt,
which potentially could have been a discipline talent for them, but there wasn't space for it.
And I think that brings back the word of the night, stalwart. So.
Yeah, as we've discussed with other disciplines, for the most part, all of the active defensive talents show up as either discipline talents or options for most of the disciplines. Yes. And obviously, as a social character, resist taunt, as having a social theme to them, having resist taunt available makes a lot of sense. It is not necessarily something that perhaps a more like stay-at-home, non-adventuring weaponsmith might necessarily need, but it's something that should be an option, and so there it is.
So this is not only a way to make your player character weaponsmith, this is kind of how to have an NPC weaponsmith that people visit a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things, like, when you're looking at sort of a setting, sort of the setting considerations as well, like looking at them not just as player characters, but also as setting considerations. If you are going to have disciplines that are important to the culture and community to some extent, like the weaponsmith is, like the troubadour is, you want to look at their design not just as, well, how can I make this the most effective adventuring player character, but you also want to make sure that there are things in their toolkit that would make sense for a non-adventuring, for an NPC style stay-at-home patron kind of thing. And so, several of the, like the weaponsmith that runs the forge in the town that the characters are based out of is probably not likely to have, Fireblood and Shield Bash and Earthskin and like the combat talents. They're going to have probably Haggle and, conversation is this one out, but haggle and diplomacy and and some of the stuff like that. They may have some other things to help fill in. Like they might have, they might have missile weapons, as an additional thing and whatnot. But so those are all, so you kind of need to look at that consideration as well when you're like figuring out when you are going to have a selection of options like that the options are available, that an NPC version of that kind of community figure is workable. Even if necessarily not a lot of player characters might go that route, which is a shame because you should.
And like I said, my first character was a weaponsmith.
Change things up a little bit.
My brother's last character was a weaponsmith, so I am fully on board. And every single time somebody says, yeah, well, if this character doesn't work out, I'll make a weaponsmith next. And so it's always like somebody's second option. And I absolutely love the fact that there is a discipline like this in this game. Because as you said, they are not frequent and they are not common in a lot of other games. Technological or not.
In terms of a player character archetype, I mean, you have there that you will have occasionally like things like the artificer shows up in D&D from time to time, which is sort of a crafting based character. I don't really know much about it, I will be honest, so I can't comment on its validity as a player character choice.
I couldn't have named it, so you're good.
But just having that as an archetype within the core disciplines presented from the beginning says something about the setting of the game and how that is, and and the flavor text of them is that weaponsmiths are important. They are valued. They are worthwhile in a maybe slightly different way, but similar way to how troubadours might be regarded.
Because, like I said, item history is that important in the setting to know the legends and histories of the stuff that you find.
Sure.
So between wizards and
but like I mean that but I mean even that from a gameplay standpoint in terms of the like finding magic items and you need to unlock the information about them in order to use them. Obviously that is really important in the terms of the typical like player character goal gameplay cycle. But even setting that aside, when you're looking at the role of a weaponsmith within the setting, for a lot of normal people within Barsave, especially in the smaller towns and villages out in the wilds, a weaponsmith is likely to be the most common source, the most common magic that they will interact with. Troubadour, as well, depending on where they are and whatnot. But that, setting aside quest doors, which have their own different kind of flavor of things, the magic of a weaponsmith is likely to be the most common interaction that most normal people have with an adept, with magic. Aside from the wandering people that come in and tend to bring trouble in their wake.
That doesn't happen.
But yeah, so
No.
the weaponsmith, we had mentioned it kind of multiple times going through these talents and stuff. There's a lot of like solid, dependable, stalwart.
That's the word of the
like
night.
that's really like those archetypes and ideas that go along with the with the sort of blunt honesty of the Smith characters, and that is called out to an extent in the essay, in the Adept's Way to a certain extent, that they don't tend to truck with deception or fancy words, or things like that.
Yes.
So like I was saying about, they have many of the same kind of talents as Troubadour as far as the social skill set goes, but the way that they present them and the way that those manifest from a weaponsmith are going to be different than they are from
Vastly.
a Troubadour or a Swordmaster or, any other character that might have those sorts of things.
Yes.
There's the...
That could be a great orator, a weaponsmith. I know that.
Well, I mean, they can be, but the type of oratory and whatnot that they are going to give is going to be less like, Henry V St. Crispin's Day speech, and more of a like solid, supportive, good word.
Yeah.
So they're, important attributes for a weaponsmith: perception, charisma,
Willpower.
a lot of the and willpower. Dexterity, obviously, if you're going to be going with a more combat direction with them,
Can't hurt.
dexterity can't hurt. Obviously, I mean, dexterity is kind of broadly useful to anybody,
Yes.
but if you're going to be going a more combat route, you probably want to pay a little bit more attention to your dexterity. With the defensive and support talents, you probably maybe, if you're talking about the combat direction, don't necessarily need to worry about toughness so much because you've got talents that help overcome any shortcomings that you might have there. But
Charisma's going to help a lot with all of those social talents you've got.
Charisma is going to be helpful. I mean,
It's not listed there as
again,
charisma is listed first as the important.
charisma charisma is listed is an important attribute. Many of their all of the social talents are based off of it, and again, their role as a community figure and a social person, even if maybe for your particular build you might not have a lot of those optional social talents, there is still a strong kind of charisma role. Weaponsmiths again can make, depending on the makeup of your party, might be a good like front man or party face or leader for the group in that regard. Certainly make a really good, like if you've got somebody else who is a better leader, the weaponsmith as a second in command or lieutenant to support them is really good. The one thing that you'll want to keep in mind as the weaponsmith, and this gets into the downtime stuff that we kind of alluded to all the way like an hour ago, if you are going to have a weaponsmith player character in your game, as a GM, you are going to want to keep in mind that they will want to have notable chunks of downtime between adventures, like more than you would normally want, because they'll need to do their own like raising talents and circling up and whatnot, but also their player characters will want to, like their fellow party members will probably want them to work on their weapons and whatnot to enhance them. And that takes time.
Yes.
And I can recognize, again, without getting into the forge blade, forge weapon rabbit hole, that is something that takes a significant time commitment.
Yes.
And there are knacks specifically designed to help overcome that once you get some experience under your belt, because we recognize that as a valid potential complaint that people have depending on the style of game that they're playing, which is all good. But you are not, as a weaponsmith, going to be, you are a specialist and a support character to an extent. You are not going to be doing the flashy combat, like heavy damage stuff that you're going to see from a warrior or a swordmaster or that sort of thing. You certainly have the capability of doing damage, especially once you get in the Journeyman circles and you get your spot Armor Flaw and some other stuff. Yes. But it is, if you are playing appropriately and you build talents, you can be a very good sort of like, especially if you've got a larger group and you've got a couple of really good frontline fighters, having the Weaponsmith be one that maybe hangs back a little bit and helps protect magicians and stuff like that from any ones that come around.
Make a nice backup bodyguard.
Is making bodyguard or second rank fighter, somebody who is just going to maybe occupy, like not be out there like necessarily killing enemies, but be there like tying them up so that they are not hitting on the squishier members of the party.
Which is why
the Weaponsmith has the tools to just stand there and take it.
Which is why they don't get maneuver or anticipate blow.
Yeah,
they're not supposed to maneuver around in combat. They're going to sit there, take the hit.
They're gonna stand there and sort of be a wall of sorts to help protect, to do that. Again, it is a fantastic discipline. It is a unique discipline in terms of what it offers as far as opportunities go, but the support that it provides is a little bit more subtle and long term.
And I would also dare to say, to add on to your thought, it makes for a more complex character because of all the options you have at your disposal. Combat heavy, social heavy, depends upon how you want to play it, where you want to get your character history from. If they were a blacksmith on a farm, or as you said, the former soldier who's now retired and gone into the smith business. So, and they also have that commerce aspect to them as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just want to go make money. Every time they go into a new town, give the Weaponsmith at that forge a couple of days off, go make the run money, turn the forge back over.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of ends up happening broadly with the 4th edition and the talent options that are available in terms of that design paradigm is that you see quite a bit more overlap between different characters, like different disciplines. Yes. Like in 1st edition, there was not necessarily quite so much overlap in terms of the talents that disciplines had because they only had so many and there were fewer talents in their overall list.
And they were fixed.
Because there were not any, or whatever, and they were fixed at certain points. So there was less overlap. But because we have more options that are available, you obviously can't pick everything that's on your options list. But because there are more options available, without exploding the list of possible talents and coming up with a whole bunch of different kind of maybe watered down variations on stuff, there's a lot more overlap. And part of the design goal on that, and I feel this was the case in 3rd edition as well, but not necessarily as cleanly expressed because it was the first time that they were playing around with it, was to allow people not only to customize their characters in the way that they want in terms of the flavor of style, but also to, if you have a group, to make sure that there is a potential for things to get covered from both a physical combat, social engagement, role-playing, and like intellectual, magical research standpoint, to have all of those potentially covered to greater or lesser extents by different disciplines. Yeah. Like if you don't have a troubadour in your group, but you have a weaponsmith and your group is well represented in, say, like combat types, it makes a lot of sense maybe to develop, I mean, again, depending on the group style of play, to develop your weaponsmith to kind of fill a social / research role that would normally perhaps be filled by a troubadour.
Yeah, so if you can't get a party of 6 players together with 6 different characters to fill all of your needs, you've got 3.
Right.
You got to cover
or
a lot
4
of ground,
or whatever.
You got to cover a lot of ground with all those characters. I see your point.
Or again, if your group doesn't have a thief, but you're going to be playing a game that's got care delving and whatnot, you've got the craftsman ability and the awareness and the danger sense and the trap stuff that kind of fits at least a certain amount. Again, it'll be expressed differently than it is from a thief.
Yeah. Because someone else may have the detect trap, but the weaponsmith has the disarm trap, and so you can work as a team, and that encourages the role playing back and forth.
So this is important in 4th edition, is that there is no separate detect trap ability.
Oh, We hadn't gotten to the thief yet.
Detect traps is a function of awareness, but in order to use awareness to detect traps, you need to have the disarm trap talent for the most part. So basically, rather than, again, like trying to pare down on the number of required talents to do stuff, then that's something it does. So if you are going to be care diving and you don't have a thief to handle the traps, your weaponsmith can do that as a function of his ability as a craftsman and enchanter to a certain extent. We didn't talk about enchanting at all.
No.
The weaponsmith does have access to a whole bunch of enchanting abilities that are all sort of available as knacks later on. Look in the companion, the enchanting chapter for that. So that is a whole other realm of stuff that, geez, we're an hour 15, an hour 20 in here at this point, you know.
Yeah. We could talk about weaponsmiths for another 2 hours and be fine.
Yeah, we probably could, without even getting down the forged weapon rabbit hole.
Yes.
So we will, I think, wrap up there. We will put the final touches, the final nail in on that. See, I'm digging for my
nail in the,
you dig for your words at the beginning. I dig for my little transitions at the end.
Put our little nail in that horseshoe that the weaponsmith has forged and made enchanted.
So yeah, we'll put the final nail in that project, and definitely the weaponsmith is really cool.
Yeah,
and I really like them. They are not flashy. But they are solid, dependable, and have a bunch of really nice tricks that can make them be an asset to any adventuring group.
Exactly. And just along those lines, as you said, a little cultural thing, I can name Hephaestus and Vulcan, which are the same god. One's Roman, one's Greek.
Right.
Other than that, but the most recent example I can give of a weaponsmith of any kind is the giant in Thor Ragnarok when he needs to go get Stormbringer.
Yeah.
So, there you are. Weaponsmith right there.
I mean, you know, again, it's an archetype that shows up in...
Without the weaponsmith, we wouldn't have Mjolnir or Stormbringer.
Yeah, it's an archetype that shows up a lot, but is not often the focal character. They are not often the central hero. They are often the support and the whatnot. Yeah. So it's nice to see them given a role as a potential main protagonist within the adventuring milieu of Earthdawn.
Great words tonight. Look at all this smithing we're doing with wordplay.
Wordsmithing. Doing some wordsmithing. All right. So if you have any comments about weaponsmiths or any other questions, or if you want to poke
rabbit hole.
If you want to poke the bear about the rabbit hole of Forged Weapon, you can
email us.
Send us an email, edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Yeah. So
we have to stop talking about weaponsmiths now.
we have to. Yeah, we have been going on for a little bit. So we will wrap up there. We will come back to weaponsmiths again, I'm sure, at some point. We will do some kind of discussion about Forged Weapon.
It'll have to happen.
Because I think there's a lot of useful design insights that can be gained from my going over the history of it and what I think the purpose of changes were and how they did or did not work. But again, that's like probably like a 45 minute discussion all on its own.
Brief.
And if we keep it brief. No, I know all of the points on that very well. So
if we can keep it somehow tidy. But yeah, that's a different thing.
Yes.
Otherwise, folks, thank you for listening. And now it's time for you to go make your own forged legend.
Forge your own legend.